This is Dan Kinsey from Kinsey & Kinsey. Today's presentation will be covering our Segregation of Duties, or SOD application for the Lawson S3 and Landmark applications. Now, what we're really trying to do here on the SOD side is show you what we can do up front before roles are assigned to users, how we can then actually check users to see if they're violating our policies, and if we have users that are violating our policies, how do we resolve those or mitigate those instances so that we can have a security model that's more in line with what our auditors would like to see. So part of our solution that we deliver at Kinsey for, again, the N4 products for S3 and Landmark is security reporting or security management, segregation of duties. We're doing auditing on those applications. We're doing user monitoring. So we're trying to provide your auditors and your IT staff with information that would help them maintain a model that is compliant to the activities going on within the organization, to make sure we don't have any fraudulent activity being processed through transactions in Lawson. So today we want to focus primarily just on SOD. So I'm going to look at three things. Proactive is how we have rules defined before we actually provision or assign those rules to users. We'll then also look at the user assignment and check what users might be violating our policies, and then how we resolve those conflicts. So when we look at the benefits of SOD, what we want to do here is we want to check for violations before we start assigning these roles to the users. So we want to check individual roles, we want to check combinations of roles, we want to see if we can make changes to role assignments of the security classes. There's a number of things we want to see, and we want to make sure our roles don't violate specific policies or combination of roles don't violate. So you can then make decisions on whether or not you're going to allow those violations to go through. You may have an organization where you can't separate the responsibilities in such a way that you don't have the bandwidth on people, quite honestly, to separate these processes, and so people are going to have to make violations or have access to forms that could violate some of our policies. So you want to make notations on, you're aware that these people are in fact violating these, and just watch their activity. There's a number of things that happen with the benefit of an SOD that comes delivered. So we're going to have 300 policies for you. We're going to have 2,500 rules already defined. The reporting is very easy to run. We're trying to make this process, when you go through audits, much more efficient and cost effective. This is what we're trying to do. Now, what we've seen traditionally within Lawson and within Landmark is that you either do not have any reporting at all for SOD, or you have nothing delivered within the application. So not only do we want to deliver policies to you, we want to deliver all the rules behind those policies, and we want to make that available for both the Landmark and the S3 apps. We're also going to help you with how do we resolve those if we see conflicts, and how do we set up notifications in case security gets changed and now we have a problem. So when we walk into these environments, we see customers using spreadsheets, but you can see on this list here that brings up a lot of issues. So are they making sure that they're keeping the security in line with their spreadsheets? When they're making changes to security, how do they know that's not going to cause a violation in some other area within the application? So those are the types of things that we think, by having an application laying on top of Lawson and checking security, you don't have to do these manual cross checks to your spreadsheets, which generally are only done normally when you go through an audit, versus being more proactive and keeping on top of that every day. So what we're going to deliver to you, as I mentioned earlier, these 300 policies. So we're going to spend about 15 minutes going through this presentation, then I'm going to jump over and show you actually some live working product. Now, a policy can have a number of rules to it, so that's how we're delivering these. There's 25 or 2,600 rules, and that would be, there's more than one way to put a vendor in the system. There's more than one types of invoice you can put in the system. So we just can't check AP 10.1 against AP 20.1. I have to check AP 10.2 and AP 16.1, the different ways you can put in vendors, along with the different ways you can put in invoices. So it could be that on a policy that might be maintain vendors and enter invoice, there could be 8 or 10 or 12 different things I have to check just to make sure that nobody's breaking that policy. We're going to deliver those to you, and we're going to deliver the rules behind that to you, and then allow you to define email notifications on the policies that are the most important to you. So the administration panel is going to come, like I said, with these pre-built policies. You can add additional policies. You can add ratings to the ones that are most important to you as a filter when you go to run reports. So if you want to take out of our 300, there's 15 policies, give those a 5-star rating. When you go to run a report, just select I only want 5-star policies, and you'll just get the rules that are most important to you. Now, you can see here that we deliver everything at the form level for S3. It's at the role or security class, and actually we'll deliver at the security class level for Landmark. And because that's the lowest level that we know all Lawson clients and Landmark clients start with. So we don't know what your roles are, we don't know what your security classes are in S3, so we do know what all your forms are going to be. So we're going to build our rules out based on the forms. And you can kind of see an example of one here where I'm going to have 2 groups of forms. So AM40.1 or AM145, if a user has access to either one of those, and on the right-hand side under Edit Fixed Asset Master, there's 4 forms there. Any one of those, that would be a violation to us. Now we need more than inquiry only. If you only have inquiry access to the form, we do not consider that a violation. You can set up as many new policies as you need. You can set them up by comparing roles at really any object level, roles to roles, security class to security class. We build everything again at the form level because that's where we need to be to start. But you can build out an unlimited number of new policies using these different objects for comparisons. So here's an example of some of our S3 policies, right? Here's a couple APs. So maintain a fictitious vendor and create a payment to that vendor. Well, you're getting access to vendor maintenance, and our consultants have identified as being the 3 forms, 10.1, .2, and 16.1, and then manual payments. And how do you do a manual payment? Or how do you do manual check processing with processing vendor invoices? So there's 3 different policies here that you can see will have a number of different rule checks. So on the first one alone, I have three forms grouped here, and I have 3 here. So this is going to do 9 different checks against this one policy. Now on the Landmark side, it's going to look more like this, where I'm really checking, instead of it at the detailed object level like a business class, I'm going to really be checking at the security class. So a similar, if I look down here at the bottom, a similar rule, which may maintain fictitious vendor and create a payment to that vendor, is going to check to see if anybody has the AP vendor setup security class and the AP payment processing security class. If they do, that's going to be a violation to us. So we can match up. What we're trying to do is get through all the Landmark. All the S3 300 rules have been done for years. We added about 60 new policies this past summer. The Landmark apps are getting built out as we're learning more about the objects that Lawson is delivering and how those will apply to our rules. But you can see just we've got some of these built already within the application so that you can look at some of the payable violations, some of the HR violations, etc. So when we look at the proactive side, again, there's some things we want to do here, right? We want to prevent roles from being set up and used and deployed without making sure first that they adhere to our policies. So a couple of things we can do. Screenshots here on the left-hand side is our role modeling. I can go in and say, I'm going to build a role out. These are the classes I'm going to add to it. Run it through my SOD policies. Tell me if I have a problem. The right side is showing you an indication here of how I can actually set up all of my roles if I need to as an automatic email notification. So if any role does become non-compliant, we will get a notification that this role, something has changed in security, and now this role doesn't adhere to all our policies. So I'll show you how this is laid out a little bit. So when we look at role, how we want to identify and test our roles and modify our roles, the SOD reporting for role validation, we're going to pull in on the left-hand side here all of your existing roles. We're going to allow you to check an individual role or any combination of roles, run it through our SOD policies, and we'll tell you if they're passed, then it's okay to deploy an individual role or a combination of roles and assign them to a user. If they fail, now we got to look at, okay, what do I have to do? How do I modify that role? What are my problems? So there's a number of things we can do here in our modeling application that goes with SOD. And in this case, maybe what I want to do is I want to remove AP maintenance and put in AP inquiry, because I know inquiry only doesn't cause me a problem, but maintenance might cause a problem. So I'm going to take an existing role, maybe it's my AP supervisor role, and I'm going to remove the maintenance, and I'm going to add AP inquiry, and I'll leave processing and data access as it is. I'm going to run a report that will show you how your security in fact has changed, and run that through our violations check to see if I come out on the other end with problems. If I don't, then I know, okay, this is the change I can make to that role that adheres to all of our policies. Now, in addition to that, I could actually create a new test role. So you may have a role that fails, and you're like, boy, I'd like to figure out how to build a new role. So without really going to security, our modeling will give this ability to simulate, okay, I'm going to take a test role and I'm going to add 2 security classes or 3 security classes to it. I'm going to print that report to say what would my security look like, but at the form level, the form table function code level, what is my security actually going to look like, run through that through the check and see if that comes out okay. So there's a number of things we can do here, including combining roles. So maybe you have a new user and you want to give them a couple roles. You're not sure that together they're okay. Maybe individually they are. In the modeling, I can say, okay, put these 2 roles together, run that through a report. Tell me what the security is going to look like. And again, I get down to the object and tell you what all the security is going to look like. Run it through my test, and then I'll come back and see if I can build security. So let's look a little bit about what that would be on our actual tools. So on the modify a role, let's say the entry clerk. So on the left-hand side here, I have this option where I can look at add role, remove role, add class, remove class. So what I'm doing here is I want to remove a security class from an existing role. So I take the role entry clerk, and it shows me all the classes currently assigned, and I'm going to remove AP maintenance, and I see I have AP inquiry. So I probably don't need maintenance inquiry. So I'm going to tell the system I want to mimic what would happen or simulate if I remove this security class from this role. I can then run a report. We're going to pull in every user that actually has access to that role, and we're going to put them on this report. So you'll know all the users that are impacted by this change. If you're removing access to a form, we're going to show that in red. If you're adding access to a new form, like if I added a security class or added a role, those changes will show up in green. And if it's a change to how that user can access a specific form, that will show up in blue. So I can see here that the vendor form is AP 10.1, and this user is going to get INP access, because what I've done is I've removed AP maintenance from their entry clerk role. They had AP inquiry in their entry clerk role, which is how they're assigned. That had INP access. So what they're going to, in fact, now is they're going to get inquiry access. So we'll look at all the different ways they actually could potentially get to AP 10.1, resolve the least restrictive access rights, and show you that on the line. And we'll show you that in blue because, in fact, their security changes by removing maintenance. Now these users, and I run the SOD report first, all these users would have shown up as a violation. If I now make this change, run my report, and run the segregation of duties report, what will happen is all those users will fall off and I no longer will have a violation. So I probably would have wanted to run this report first, see where my problems are, which is ideally why I went into this in the first place, and then run it after I make the change to see if those users come off. So that's just modifying a role. Then if I wanted to build a new role, what I can come and I can come up here and say I'm going to add a security class. I'm going to have a role set in my test system called SOD role, which is a simulated role for segregation of duties. I had a class. I might have a class already assigned or not. I can remove that. I can add more classes back in. So in this case, what I've done is I've added security classes AP analysis, AP maintenance, and AP processing. So I want to see if I were to put those 3 together and build a role and then assign that role to, I have a test user set up, show me what my security would look like. So I have a test user set up called isolated SOD user, and you'll see that right here in this cell. And now it's coming back and looking at my security based on what I just built. And if it's green, it tells me I've now provisioned access into those forms. When I run a segregation of duty report against my payables, because I'm working in payables, I can see this user in fact comes back and it's telling me this isolated user does in fact violate at least policy 315. Everything in green that shows up here tells me that was new to them. And now I know that putting these 3 together in fact is going to be a problem. So this is the way that I can look at roles, work with a test user, assign that role to the test user. I could have again, made different combination of roles, remove the role they had, add another role on. We can do all that to determine whether or not this would fix any problems with the way roles are assigned in the application. So now we get into reactive. So we know up front I can do some modeling to know how I want to build a role, what security classes I want in it, that sort of thing, and test that and run that through my process. But now I've actually got roles assigned to users, so I want to see, do I have any problems? So we're going to give you a dashboard, which is on the left-hand side here, of you have 5 different ratings of your policies, so those each come with a color. Green tells you that your policies are being followed within that application, and gray means they're disabled. So I can have policies that maybe you just disable because you don't want to use everything that we have pre-built for you. So red here is our 5-star policies being violated. So I've got a couple things that I can watch here on a daily basis, and if I get any red showing up on my dashboard and it had been clean, all of a sudden I know, maybe anything other than gray and green, I know I got a violation that has just popped up. The right-hand side then is how we would run our traditional report of how I can look at it by the policy and all the users that are violating that policy, or at the user level and every policy they might violate. So let's look at the user violation here. So I have, in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, instead of looking at the role validation or the violation report, I'm going to look at it at a user level. So now we're going to extract all your users out of your system, and we're going to allow you to select an individual policy or a category being like payables or receivables or closing, or you can select any combination of policies. Maybe it's all your 5-star policies. So whatever you want to pick, we'll run that through, check for SOD violations. If it passes, then you know you're okay. Otherwise, you're going to have to somehow modify your security. Now that report's going to look like this, and you can do a number of things with our reports. These all come within the browser. They're all exportable to Excel. They can be printed out as a PDF. When you run them in HTML in your browser, you're going to see you have the ability to drill into our other applications. So if you come up with a security class of AM processing in the lower left corner here, and I want to know, show me everything that is in AM processing, how is that security class defined? We'll give you all the objects that are in that security class so you can see how that's set up within your application. You might want to drill on a specific object and say, show me all the security classes that object belongs to, because I don't want to necessarily give this user all access. Let's say here to AM270. Maybe I want to give them inquiry only. So show me the other security classes in the system where AM270 lives. Now with our reports, you're able to do notifications, save reports, and send them out through emails. So if you have these 5-star, say, payable policies that you want to go to the payable manager if there's a violation, then we'll simply select those policies, save that as a report, set up a notification, and you can go out every week, every month, whatever schedule you want it to be on, you define, and they'll get an email of either the Excel report or an HTML report that they can then look at and find out what kind of problems and why do we now have a violation when we didn't have one before. So that's just part of our standard SOD reporting. Now, along with that, we provide this Excel output, and I won't go through every sheet here, but at a high level view, what I'd like to see is all of my users, all of my policies, and if I just ran for payables, I'd only see 15 policies here versus 300. But what we're going to put is put an X where you have a violation. Now, we don't really know if the user is doing anything to cause us a problem. We don't know that they're doing, for instance, vendor maintenance and invoice entry, but we know they have at least add, change, delete access to those forms, either add or change, delete. They have to have all three, but it has to be something more than inquiry. If it's inquiry only, again, we don't care. That's not a violation for us. So this is just part of the standard deliverable report that'll give you a high-level view of what's going on in the application. So then we get to the mitigation side. So now we have to figure out what are we really looking at here as far as how would we solve this. So there's a number of things we want to pull together for you here. Our modeling, our monitoring, our SOD rules. You see a couple screenshots here that I'll go a little deeper into. But the one on the left, that's very similar to our Excel grid with the X's, only now I'm also looking at the activity for users. So a green indication would tell me that they're in violation of the policy, but they're not using a form on either side of those groupings that we discussed. The yellow tells me they're using a form on one side of the grouping. They have access on both, but they're only using a form on one side. So they're probably pretty low risk. A red actually box will tell me that that's a person that has access on to violate on forms on both sides of that grouping. So there is a violation, and they are using forms on both sides. Those are the people I probably want to focus in on. So let's look how this would work. So we go back to our regular reporting, and we're going to pull out our users, pull out our policies, see what we want to check, run it through our violations and see if we're compliant or not. And this time now we need to modify. So let's, within the application, to do this using our role and object modeling. So the first, we've already seen kind of what we can do with roles. So I see I have a red box on my screen. All right, so now I want to see what's assigned to this user. And I want to see, what can I modify to maybe resolve this conflict? Can I remove the role from a user? Can I change the security class in the role? Can I change it at an object level? Do I need to change AP 10.1 to inquiry only? I can do a number of things within the role modeling, print these reports and run them through. But if that doesn't get me there, I can also do it at the object level. So the object modeling will allow me to take a specific form out of a security class. Maybe I want to add AP 10.1 to a different class so it doesn't have a conflict with the user that I'm having a problem with. Maybe I want to change AP 10.1 to inquiry only in a specific class, and that would resolve my problem. So when we get down to looking at if you want to change the permissions in an object, we can do that if doing it through changing a role or changing a security class doesn't do it for you. In each one of those cases, I can, like before, I can print a report, tell you what your changes are going to be, tell you what your security is going to look like for this person, check the SOD report to see if I have any violations, and if I'm okay, we'll go ahead and go make those changes in security. Now, we're not making those for you. This is all simulated in our modeling. We'll give you a report that says here's the changes that would need to be made based on what you just did a simulation for. Security officer can go in and make those changes. Now, we added another layer to this where we said, okay, now if we know the activity, let's give them this red, yellow, and green. So we're looking at, we have an application called Activity Monitor that will look for everything that's going through your application. We'll pull out the usage of all the forms, and if we're using something on both sides of the equation for vendors and invoices, we'll come back and tell you they have add, change, delete access. They are using those forms. It's critical. So let's paint that as a critical violation on our chart. So this is kind of how this would look like. So I might come up here and I see Lawson for AP or number 150, policy 157, and when you're in the real application, you hover over this and it tells you what that policy is. And you'll actually be able to click on this cell, and that'll bring back a second page that tells you everybody that has access to those forms, where their violations might live. And I can see here I have a lot of violations, but I've only got the Lawson user actually doing anything within the application. And if I look down here on the left-hand side, I can see they've used AP 10.1 13 times and AP 20.1 3 times. By clicking on the 13 or the 3, we actually can drill into the detail, and I'll show you this in the demo, and show you what they're actually doing in the application. So in AP 10.1, what vendors did they make changes to? Now these, if they did inquiries, I'm not counting them here. I don't care about inquiries. These are actually add, change, or deletes to AP 10.1 and AP 20.1. So I have a problem here with this user because not only do they have access to AP maintenance and AP processing, which violates my policy, they're actually using these forms as well on both sides. So they could have gone in here and set up a temporary vendor and come over here and enter a basic invoice for it. And that's kind of what I want to see. I could see the actual keys to the record by clicking on the number of hits. And so if you go in there and you don't see a vendor that matches up on both sides, that's probably not anything that they've done wrong, but you may not want to allow them to have that much access. But what I can do is I can simulate that how would I fix this. So when I click on the AP 10.1, the right side now will show me everybody that has access to that form and what level of access they have. There's different things using our modeling behind the scenes here that I can say, what if I changed AP 10.1 to inquiry only? How many people in a specific class, in this class AP maintenance, how many people would be impacted by that? Because as we know, when you start modifying security at a low level, it rolls up to a lot of people. So I have to know the impact on any changes I make. our modeling application alone would help you with that and tell you that. When it's added to SOD remediation, it allows me to potentially fix these policies. In this example, what I've done is at the bottom right, you'll see I removed security class AP maintenance from the role financial supervisor. That actually impacted 2 people and they're highlighted. When I go back to my overall grid, what I see are check marks at where I in fact resolved these policies. So I was only working with 157, but if I did that one change, I took AP maintenance out of the financial supervisor role, I fix also policies 315, 321, 322, and 330 for that user. So that's good. That's kind of what I want to do. And that's what this is telling me. And sometimes we find that by making one change, we fix a lot of areas. So with that, what I want to do is we're going to jump into a live demo of the applications just to give you a feel for actually how these work. So looking at our dashboard for SOD reporting, I can kind of get an indication of the number of policies that are currently being violated in any one of my categories based on their star rating. So we want to have you at least give you a view where you can track 5-star policies or 4-star policies easily being violated by their color. So in this case, red policies are 5-star, and I can see in a few of my areas within the S3 applications I have some violations, and in the landmark I also have a few landmark violations. So let's start by looking at how these policies are defined. So I'll go to administration, go to SOD policies. So we'll look at both the S3 policies and a few landmark policies that I currently have defined. And we'll go into the payables, and you can see my different disciplines here that we have policies built for. So I'll go to payables management. And there's a number of things I can do within the application then. So I can rate these based on the level of importance to the organization. So maybe I'll rate them up to a 4-star or a 5-star. So you can rate each one. I can enable or disable the policies. Or I can simply edit and look at what's contained within the policy and the rules behind it. Now, for our application, the user would need to have more than inquiry-only access in order to violate the policy. So if they're inquiry-only to the vendor masters, then we don't consider that a violation, even if they have access to AP 20.1 to enter an invoice. They have to have add, change, delete access to one of the forms on both sides of the grouping here. So in this situation, for this one policy, we're doing, it looks like there's 7 and 3 on the left, 7 on the right. We're doing 21 different rule checks. So for example, a user would have to have access and add, change, delete access to AP 10.1 and AP 20.1 would be one check. Then we check for AP 10.1 and AP 20.2 as the second check. So we would go through each of those 21 checks, and if a user violates any of those 21, we consider that a violation to the policy. So you'll see that there's a number of policies here that are all enabled for S3 reporting. So fictitious, enter a vendor and create a payment, enter a fictitious vendor invoice, and then render payment. And you can see how those rules are defined here as well. Now on the landmark side, we also have policies. So I'll go to my landmark server and we'll look at some of the landmark policies here as well. Now these are going to be built using the same policies but with different rules. So in the S3 applications, we build everything down to the form level because we know all Lawson customers start with the same forms. We don't know your security classes or your roles when we implement the solution. For landmark, we do know what the security classes are going to be because Lawson delivers those with landmark. So if I look at the same or similar policy here that says enter fictitious vendor invoice and then render payment, I can see that's done through the security class AP basic invoice processing and AP payment processing would do the payment side versus the entering the invoice side. So if I was looking at just a vendor, that would be a vendor invoice. AP vendors are done through AP vendor setup and invoicing through AP basic invoice processing. So what I'm doing for a user is I'm checking to see if they have those two security classes assigned to them through whatever roles they have. Again, we don't know your roles when you start out, but we do know the security classes. So there's a number of these policies. We continue to build out the rules for all the policies within Landmark, but that's kind of a work in process as Landmark evolves and more applications become available. So let's go back to SOD reporting. So now in the presentation, I went through kind of the 3 steps. Let me go back to my S3 applications. So the presentation I showed you how we went through the proactive and the reactive. So looking at a couple proactive things, and I want to try to keep this presentation to about 20 or 25 minutes. So let's look at some proactive. So one of the things we did was we modified, or actually what I did there is I went through and checked to see if the roles themselves adhere to the policies. So on the left-hand side here, I have some saved reports. And one of them is the AP data entry role test. So if I were just to run this, and what the definition behind this is, I selected that role, told it I wanted to run it against the payable policies, and let me know if there's any violations. And when I look at this, I get no violations for AP data entry. So I can do that with additional rules. Here's AP manager rule test, and if I check this, I believe this will also come up with no violations. So those two roles on their own test out without any problem against all the payable policies, and that comes up here with no violations. Now, another thing that we talked about in the presentation was how can I look at combining roles, and when I combine them, does that cause a problem? So individual roles are easy to check. I can actually set that up by going through, defining a new report. I tell it I want to do the LS application. I'm going to remove what doesn't apply to, I'm going to just check payable policies. Now I may check payable and purchasing and maybe I think the receiving are underneath the purchasing. And maybe I want to do a role test. So what I had done to determine which roles I wanted to put out and save is I simply scrolled through here. I told it to take AP data entry. I closed this and I saved this as a report and I called it the AP data entry role test. So now what I want to really do though is I want to combine AP data entry with the AP manager role because I know those both tested out. Now I could also save this and give it a name, or I can just run it from here. I'm not going to check the landmark, and we'll run this. Now if this comes back with anything other than just a clean report, then I know putting these two together is going to be problematic. And because I get the grid, I know there are some forms out here that are causing a problem. And I can see that by putting these two together, the AP data entry person or role and the AP manager role, that I violate policy 316, and that's because of the AP 20.1 and through 1.6. And here's my all my token definitions to the rule. So I can enter a fictitious vendor invoice and then render payment. So I can come over here and I can enter payment or process the payment to that. So this is a problem for us. And if I scroll down through the list, I can see the number of policies. In this case, it looks like I violate policy 316 and 322. And the legend at the bottom will give you an indication of what the different function codes do on that form. So instead of just telling you that you have all access to a form, we're going to tell you what all access means. So we're going to give you all the function codes available so you can look through the legend to see what in fact can you do on that form. Now, with all of our SOD reporting, you can also drill to the security reporting within the application. So if you wanted to know what else is in the AP security class, I can drill to a security class form report. I could do all objects if I want to see programs, system codes, tables, but this will give me all the forms within that class, the available function codes, and the current rule. So I could look at what's in here other than just the AP 20.1 through 20.6. We can also look at where else does AP 20.1 live, or what users have access to it. So if I just wanted to see where else AP 20.1 lives within the security model, I can see here it's in 3 different classes. The one I'm looking at is AP processing with all access, but the inquiry has just inquiry capability. So I may want to do something where the role that this user is attached to, I change them from a processing to an inquiry. And then I potentially wouldn't have a violation on this side, and that'd be the case if I got rid of AP processing in their role. If you want to know what roles it belongs to, I can simply click on role security class here. So that's how we do the proactive, looking at, I've got roles that I want to check to see if they violate policies. I have role combinations that I want to check to see if they violate policies. Now, we can also do that within the Landmark app. So if I were to come over to Landmark and I go to my SOD reporting, you're going to see similar functionality here. Or if I'm just going to add a new report, I can tell it this is Landmark. I can tell it I'll do the drop and tell it a role test, and I'll select my roles. So here's all my Landmark roles that are currently defined. I can select the financial viewer. That probably, by definition, is probably going to be inquiry only access. But maybe I want to check billing administrator to see if billing administrator currently violates any of my landmark policies. So I'll just check landmark here, and I can run this report, and I won't go through that exercise. But if I run this report, it'll come back and tell me, does in fact that role violate any of my policies? And that's what I'm trying to find. And we can do the same thing where we combine roles as well. Now, one thing I didn't show you on the S3 side, if you want to work with a particular user or an actor, you can do a drop down here. You can select which user you want to work with. We'll pull in all the roles they have assigned. So you can either say, I'm going to take these roles away from this person. I'm going to add this role onto this person. Now let's check to see if that, in fact, I have a problem. So we can do that with S3 also, where we'll pull up a user. I'll give you all the roles they have assigned. You can reassign those roles and check for violations. So we'll close out of here and go back to our S3 applications. So we have this same functionality for both Landmark and S3. So let's look at how we do a little more proactive reporting as opposed to just doing, reactive reporting as opposed to proactive, so that we can see what violations we actually have in the application. So you'll see down the left-hand side here, I have a number of already saved reports, and some of them have a little clock behind them. So that means that they're a scheduled report that will be sent out weekly, monthly, whatever schedule you set up, and to whatever distribution list you've defined. But let me just show you how we might do a proactive report for a particular So let's look at how we do proactive modeling. So we talked about the modeling in the presentation a little bit, about how we went through role modeling, how we created a new role, how we added that role to a user, and how we can do those testing. So I'm going to jump over to LS reporting here. I'm going to go to role modeling. So we have a role out there called entry clerk. Entry clerk currently has kind of too much capability to it. So if I were to run a report for it, I would end up with a number of violations. So I'm going to run an SOD report here just to check it before we start anything. And I'm going to run against payables. I'll go ahead and run this report. And we'll look at a user policy. So the only thing I wanted to show you here is that we in fact have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 users violating this, because this entry clerk role that's assigned to some of these users is in fact going to cause a violation because it has AP maintenance and AP processing as part of the role. So I want to see what would happen if I changed entry clerk. So I'm going to go to remove security class as part of my modeling. I'm going to select entry clerk, and I can see AP maintenance is there. So I'm going to remove AP maintenance as one of the options. If I look at what I've got going on here, I tell it there's one operation I'm going to try. I'm going to go ahead and run an SOD report. I'll run a new payables report, and I should see this list go from about 9 users down to 3 or 4 users in violation, because I've cleaned up a lot of those problems because I changed the security class assignments to the entry clerk role. So if I come back up here and run user policy, you'll see now that I'm actually down to 5 users, so 4 of those users got cleaned up. Now, I could have just come back in here and run a report to see what happens. So I'm going to run a report based on these assignments. Go ahead and click Run. And this is where I can see what changes are going to in fact happen to any users that have the entry class role. So let's go over here to tokens, and I see I have a number of users here. Here's the users. I have their roles above them, so every role assigned to them. I'll just pull that up. And now what I want to look here for is anything that's in red, blue, or green. So I know that the AP probably has to do with, AP maintenance is going to have to do with AP forms. So I could come out here and put filters on these, or I'll just go ahead and scroll down to, we'll freeze panes here. And I'll scroll down to the AP forms, and AP, here's our blue. So I see in blue here, AP 10.1, .2, .3, and I think 16, probably down here, 16.1 would have similar changes, and it does, because those were in the AP maintenance role, or security class, excuse me. So now if I expand one of these, what I'll see is that the AP maintenance security class was part of entry clerk, and the AP inquiry is also part of entry clerk. So this user had access to entry clerk as a role, so they had both of these security classes. One had all access, one had all inquiries. So the red indicates that we've removed that security class and that form from this user at this level. So what's going to happen is they're going to, by default, they're now going to have inquiry only access. So I can see that's rolled up to AP 10.2 is all inquiries. AP 10.1 would reflect the same. When all access is taken away, they have INP access in set up in security. So blue tells me there's a change to the security. Green would tell me they've got new security to a form they didn't have before. So now I have a report that shows me how the security changes, and I also have an SOD report that shows me all these users went away. So that changing entry clerk may be something I want to do if I can take AP maintenance away from those people. Now the other thing we talked about was how to create a new role. So let me clean this up, get rid of those changes. So we're going to create a new role. So the first thing I'm going to do is I've created in our test system a role with nothing in it. It might have one security class in it. It's called, I picked the wrong one, SOD simulated role. So I have the security class called batch in there now. I could delete batch from it, but all I'm going to really worry about here is I'm going to assign some new security classes. So I have basically an empty role that I want to assign some security classes to see how that's going to perform within SOD. So I'm going to go to some AP functionality here. And let's say we add AP maintenance. And we add, how about AP processing? We'll add those two. I can look at what my changes are, and I've added those two. Now what I need to do at this point is I need to add this role so it shows up on my report to a user. So I've got a test user called isolated SOD role. I've got one current role assigned to them. We can remove that. First I'm just going to add the role we just simulated. We'll go ahead and add that on. Then I can go to remove role, and from this same user, it tells me I have two, I'm going to remove this one. So if I look at my show changes, I've created a new SOD role that includes AP maintenance and AP processing. I've removed, isolated this inherited HR11 role. So let's go ahead and run a report here. I've got a saved report just for this one user. We'll go ahead and run this. And if I look at these results, I'm going to get, this is at the system code level. Let me go to the tokens. I'm going to see that this is all added forms for this user. So I've got this isolated user out there that is just a test user that I assigned a new role to, and I could assign any combination of roles to and run this report and see what kind of access they're going to have. So even if you don't create a new role like I did kind of on the fly there, I could have simply taken this user, added 3 roles to it, run a report, and it'll tell you what they have access to in the system. Even if you're not checking SOD, you can use it for that purpose. Now in this case, I also want to see if this causes a violation. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. I'm going to go to payables because I'm focused on payables. I could run it for everything, but it just takes a few more minutes to do. And if isolated user comes up as one of my users in violation, then we know that these role assignments would be problematic assigning to that user. So let's go ahead and do this. And I see here that this user does in fact show up. So they do violate policy 315. We can see in green what's been added. Again, I can drill to what's in AP maintenance if I need to. But building a role that has AP maintenance and AP processing in it is going to violate, looks like one of our policies, policy 315. So I probably want to add AP processing with AP inquiry, and I wouldn't have this problem. So I could come back and I could go back to show my changes. I can remove AP maintenance here. I could run it like this. Maybe I don't even want to add the other class, or I could go to a class, and I could now just go to my SOD role, and I could add, it's probably down here at the bottom, ZZAP inquiry, and I can add that, and now I won't go through this, but these are my changes, and that should now run through clean because inquiry doesn't have the ability to do add, change, or delete. So on the reactive side, before we get to mitigation, we just want to basically run reports. So if I go to my SOD reporting, and I say SOD report, and I have a number of saved reports here like we've already seen, and I just want to run a payables report. So I can set up, when I define a new report, based on star ratings, based on the category that I want to work in, based on individual policies, we can set up, save, and schedule those reports. So if I want to look at the user policy, this would be every user and how many policies they violated, or I can look at a policy and see how many users violate that policy. And you'll see again, I get my legend, and I can come out here and I can see now for policy 315, I have all these users, kind of what we saw before when I was outside of modeling, and I see a reason I have my violations. And we've seen these results before from when I ran an SOD report from the modeling application before I started making any role changes. So I can run that at the policy level, I can run it at the user level and show me just one user and how many policies they violate. So Frank Nelson only violates one AP policy. And again, we can do the drill here. If I want to know what is in AP processing, I can drill into the security class and I can see what's in here. So these are all the forms assigned and the current level of security assigned to them. So we can do that, and we also have the Excel version here, which I showed the grid that comes out and is going to give you where you have violations for every user. Now again, if I come back to my landmark and go to landmark portal, and I go to SOD reporting, and I run an SOD report, I can go ahead and run this for payables on the landmark side, run the report, and this will come back and give me violations of these actors in the security classes. So we'll let this run through. I'll run an actor policy report. It's going to be very similar. I have a lot of actors here. I can expand this, and I can see that this user has vendor setup and basic invoicing. If I want to know what's in vendor setup, I'll go back and say, well, let me see what roles are assigned to it. Okay, so it's a payable specialist, and I want to know everything that's in it. So this is how security class vendor setup is defined, and I can look at this at every object. I can search through these fields. It tells me here it is accessible for all actions. So it's not just an inquiry capability, it's actually unconditional actions on all these objects. So the AP vendor setup is problematic if I combine that with the AP payment processing or AP basic invoicing. Okay. So that's what we want to show you on the landmark side. Now these can be defined at the role level or at the security class level currently, so that you can run the same reports we talk about on the S3 side on the landmark side. Again, these can be saved, they can be scheduled. To schedule a report, you simply click on the report, click on schedule. I can select an existing schedule, which may be just monthly. I can have as many of these as I want, different frequencies. Select an existing group. I have an audit group. I can save that. And I'll see I get a clock beside this that tells me that's a scheduled report to be emailed out. And this, again, same for S3 as it is for landmark. So let me close back out of here. So on the reporting side, I have 2 or 3 different ways that we're going to deliver reports to Excel and different sort options within the HTML reports themselves. You can put these out to the printer. Again, we have the Excel output, and you can look at them as HTML on your screen. So on the standard proactive SOD is how we're just trying to, the reactive SOD is what we're trying to do on showing you where you currently have your violations, how you set up notifications for either roles that you want to be notified of or entire sets of policies in every user that has a problem within any of those policies that might be broken. Now finally then we want to get to the mitigation, or what we call SOD remediation. So I'm going to go back to my home page here, and I'm going to look at SOD remediation icon, and I'm going to work with a set of dates going back to the beginning of the year. So I can look at just the last 30 days of activity, the last 60 days, whatever custom range I want to look at. You would want to do that because as you change security, people may have had access to some forms 6 months ago they can't get to now. So you don't want the forms that could get access to a long time ago clouding your model. In my case, I'm going to go back to 1/1/2018 through, we'll go through today. Now select my profile I want to work with. And this will paint my grid of where I have violations, where I have warnings, and where I have critical violations, and those would be in red. So every color you see on here actually indicates that we have a violation. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that people are using those forms. So you can see the legends at the top. Red violates all groups in the policy, so there's generally 2 groups. Violated 1 group in the policy, or they don't use the forms even though they're violating the policy. So let me focus on payable since we've been working in there. And we'll see here now that I have the user Lawson has actually used forms. I'll go ahead and go into 157. And what I see here is how user Lawson is using edit vendor master conflicts with process vendor invoices. Maybe I want to see how everybody that is impacted by this policy and how they're violating and what their security is set for. So here's all my users, the forms that are definition behind the policy, and what they have access to and what they've used. So I can see the majority of my users have not used any of these forms even though they have access. The Lawson user has. I can see down here on the left that Lawson has used AP vendor.1 in an add change delete mode. They could have done hundreds of inquiries, and I don't show those counts here. I only care about add changes. So if I want to know what they've done in AP 10.1, I can click on the 13, pull up the activity from our monitoring tool, and this will tell me the 13 changes or adds or deletes done by the user Lawson, when they were done, the date and the time, and the vendor that they worked on. So I can see here that even vendor 118 at the bottom is one of our vendors. If I have transaction auditing, out on the right you're going to have an audit icon. I can actually see what change was done. So if I click on this and I expand the more button and scroll down through all the data, what I'm going to see here is the before and after, and I probably have a terms code change or something in here. There's actually looks like a couple changes. So what I'm going to tell the system here is to only show me the changes. And now let's see what was done here. All right, so what was easier to see here this way is the vendor terms code changed from immediate to net 0. So that was just the change made. Some of these other changes are tab changes to get to that, or some things Lawson identifies as a change behind the scenes. In this case, what I'm really concerned about here is the vendor terms code. So I've seen what change was done, and I could do the same thing on any one of these. But if I come back and say, okay, I also see that they're doing AP 20.1, what invoices are they working on for what vendors? So we'll pass those filters through, and I can come back and see there's three invoices, the invoice numbers, and they're also on vendor 118, and maybe I'd want to see what was done there. So as long as I'm auditing this screen, I can drill back on this. Let me make sure this is set to only show changes. And we'll look at this, and this was changed from 4120 to 6120. So there was a dollar amount change on the line item. So I may want to find out why this user is working on this vendor and this invoice, because they shouldn't really have access to do work on both. And in this case, we're finding activity for the same vendor from the same user. And we could verify we're even talking about the same dates. But in this case now I've seen that maybe my access is too open and I need to do something about it. Well, like everything else, I could drill right into what else is in this role, what else, how is the security class defined. But I want to look at AP 10.1 specifically because that's where my problems are. I'll look at everybody who has access to AP 10 and I'll determine what could I do here to maybe resolve this conflict. Well, one option would be change all access to inquiry only, but that's going to impact everybody else that's in this list. So we're showing you every user that has access to AP 10.1, and by making one change, what's that going to do to them? Well, I don't want to do that. Maybe what I want to do is I want to remove AP maintenance from financial supervisor. If I do that, 2 people are impacted. Okay, that's fine. Well, what if I actually wanted to see, does this user have any other way to get to AP 10? So I'll go ahead and drill to my reporting, and I'll see if I took maintenance away from them, they do have a way to get there through controller. And what's controller access? It's inquiry only. So that would probably be okay because they do have 2 ways of getting there. So by removing AP maintenance from financial supervisor, I'm actually okay. Now I'm going to work with somebody that, I'll close that out. The other option there would be just to remove, if I'm worried about Lawson, remove financial supervisor as a role, and who else is impacted by that? And it's nobody. But let's go up and make a bigger change so you can see maybe what would happen here on a larger scale. Let's go to somebody like B. Thomas. Now B. Thomas hasn't used anything here, so more than likely B. Thomas doesn't need security class AP maintenance in entry clerk. So like I did in the modeling, I'll go ahead and remove AP maintenance from entry clerk. Well, that impacts a lot of people. Well, again, I want to know, do they have any way to get to AP 10.1 if I do that? And in this case, I think we're going to find that if we have the ZZ inquiry security class, so I know that they have another way to get AP 10.1. That security is set to INP. I could also see what else is in this class, so I can drill down further in the class to see, let's make sure this is not AP 10.1, and I can see here there's a lot of forms that they're going to have access to. So I'm probably pretty safe by removing that security class from that role. If I were to do that, does that solve any of my problems? So let's refresh the model and go back and look at our grid. So on the left-hand side here, see it's rebuilding. Now I'm going to go back to my grid here, and if any policies are resolved, I'm going to get check marks. So you can see here both policies, even though I'm only working in 157, policy 315 had very similar issues. So by removing the one security class from that role, they still had a way to get to those forms, but it solved or resolved a number of, what we got, 6, 10, 14 different policy violations were resolved if I go ahead and make that one change. Now, you can print this page out and you'll have to hand this to a security officer to make that change, but we're telling them what you need to do is remove security class AP maintenance from entry clerk, and we'll solve this. So I can go through this process, one at a time, and keep refreshing things. And we'll have all the policies out here in this case, because I've done so many changes, I'm down to just a handful. But if we go ahead and delete this and refresh, I'll get different violations back here now, and I can start the whole model process over again. So that's what we're trying to do here. And if I come back to my grid, I'm back to where I was with my 5-star, or with my payable policies. These filters could be based on, it can be all, and you could say, I only want all categories 5-star and above, and that will now cross over any of the particular disciplines and give you your 5-star policies to start working on. But that's what we're attempting to do, is give you a place to start. Now, I'll touch briefly on the modeling of the objects. So we're doing something very similar here, and I talked about it a little bit in the presentation. So if I come back and I go to LS reporting, and I look at my object modeling, I can see if I go to AP 10.1, and I want to know, what if I just changed that one object to inquiry only? Would I still have a problem? Well, I want to know everybody has access to it, and I want to know, what if I were just to change, remove it from AP maintenance, or what if I were to add it to another security class, the different things I can do. Well, if I want to know who has, let's see, how does F. Nelson get to AP 10.1, they get there 2 ways. I draw a map. If I look at AP maintenance, I want to know everybody has access to AP maintenance. I see there's a lot of people here who have access there. And if I do AP inquiry, I also see a similar group of people that have access here. So let me go ahead and hide these. And let's say if I were to delete AP 10.1, well, let's say if I delete the AP maintenance role, what happens? Well, or security class. If I delete the AP maintenance security class, and I click on the check mark, I see other people that have attached. And notice how everything changed orange. Let me hide this. Everything changed orange. That means what you've in fact done is you've changed their level of access because you've deleted the AP maintenance security class. And it completely removes access from user Sammy Christian. Well, I can reactivate that. So instead of deleting the security class, what if I just took these function codes out? What would that, okay, that tells me that it's going to change them all to inquiry only by making, and maybe I want to have add access. It'll come back and tell me what level of access they would have by making this change of AP 10.1 in the AP maintenance security class. I could also add it to a new security class. So I could say, if I want to take AP and I say I want to add it to the AP cache and add, see, I can see any additional people that would show up will come through over here. If I want to see who has access to AP cache, I can come this way. So, or if I want to see how else does Hal Rogers have it, I see the different connections on the way that Hal can get access, all working within AP 10.1. Now, once you've made any changes you want to make over here, once you've deleted anything out or added a new one in, I can run an SOD report for all policies that contain AP 10.1 as a form on those, and we'll check those for you to see if you were to make these changes, what kind of problems would you have. So what we're trying to do is get you to a point where maybe your policies for payables are clean. You want to come in, you're trying to say I want to add AP 10.1 somewhere. If you run an SOD report and you start to get violations, then that's a change that's going to be risky for you. So that's how the modeling ties into this, but we use this modeling functionality back in the SOD remediation when we're looking at the individual users and how to change their assignments or change them to inquiry. So that's all I'm going to do on the presentation side. Just a little bit more on the implementation then. I'll show this so you can, this will be published out there, the PowerPoint and the PDF on our website. These applications run for version 9, 10, and 11. They run either on-premise or in Lawson's cloud. Your Kinsey, it's a Kinsey VM you would set up. That can be in the cloud or that can stay on-premise. So a lot of our customers keep Lawson in the cloud, be it 10 or 11, but keep their Kinsey VM on-prem. So that's an option for you. The implementation, the technical installation takes 1 to 3 days, depending on the product selected, and the training usually takes less than 3 days, and this is all done remote. Training takes less than 3 days to get you through how to use these applications. It's pretty turnkey. We're going to show you how to modify the rules. Most of our customers actually take far less training than that. But none of this needs to be done on site. We're happy to come on site, but generally we just do it in 2 to 3 hour sessions of training to get through the application. That's all I have. I think we're at about an hour, so again, thank you for attending. And if you have any questions, up in the right-hand corner, certainly Guy Henson, who many of you might know, he's our VP of Sales Operations. Guy can help you out with any question you have. You want to have a demo for the rest of your team, we're happy to put that together and give you a private demo on any of the applications we have. Thank you.